human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Good Samaritan Medicine.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. It's April 14th. It is the day before tax day. Shortly before this show, I got an email from my tax preparer saying, hey, are we filing extensions this year? And I responded back with a yes exclamation point. And I was just reflecting on trying to tie in that whole tax day situation with the show. And although it's a bit of a stretch, I think there is a tie-in. And the tie-in is simply that, we are billed and we pay our taxes. Taxes are collected for the common good. And increasingly in modern society, medical science is something that is intended for the common good. My daughter is going to college this year, and she's entering into a degree that's broadly speaking in the medical profession. And it's expensive to get that 6-year degree. She has to get a master's before she can even do anything. So there is a tie-in today and a little bit of a rambling intro, but we have somebody who is well versed and well positioned to talk about this topic tonight from really the highest perspective possible. His name is Kosti Psimopoulos. He goes by Kosti. And he is a Harvard-based kinesiologist and bioethicist. He's working at the intersection of health, spirituality, disability, and human flourishing. He serves as an instructor in bioethics and human flourishing with Harvard's initiative on health, spirituality, and religion. He helps shape ethics training for scientists and clinicians at Harvard Medical School and the T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And as if that isn't enough, he also directs the Division of Bioethics at the Orthodox Academy of Crete under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So he has a broad experience and a deep expertise in this subject. Without any further ado, let's bring him into the studio. Welcome, Kosti, to Created in the Image of God.
Thank you so much, Wade. So good to be here. And as we always say after Easter, Christ is risen, or Christos Anesti. In the Orthodox calendar, we just had celebrated Easter. So good to be here.
Indeed. Yeah, I was about to go down the path of a certain meme that just came out. But as I said that, a massive rolling ball of thunder, I don't know if you heard it there.
I heard it.
Because we are in the middle here of a storm, right? And they canceled all the activities at the high school. My son was supposed to be in a tennis match with another school, and it was all canceled because we're actually under a tornado warning. The power cut out briefly about an hour ago. So who knows what's going to happen on the show tonight. But mostly, as long as we're here and able to talk, we're going to learn a lot about a very important topic. But first, let's get to know Kosti a little bit. As we always do on the Created in the Image of God show, we want to understand the circumstances and forces that shaped you and the basis for these diverse but focused activities that you're involved in. So tell us a little bit about who your parents were and how did you become who you are today?
Yeah, thank you so much. I will try to keep it brief because I usually tell the story in about 50 minutes, so I don't want to spend the entire show. But I will start by saying that I think by the grace of God, I am where I am today. And you will understand by what I have to say how this is really a big driving force, and also how, a perspective of life, how I see life in general. My father Spiridon Psimopoulos is a trained Byzantine historian. He actually trained at Seton Hall in the great state of New Jersey and then at NYU. My mother, Theano, is an educational psychologist. She also trained in New Jersey after having come from Greece, as my grandfather and grandmother did. So they came as immigrants from Greece. But eventually my father's dream was to take this American dream and go back to the birthplace, the motherland of Greece. Hence my accent, I usually say, although I was born a US citizen, so I was able to have the best of both worlds. So that's the first element on this dual, let's say, not only citizenship, but this dual perspective of seeing both East and West as an Orthodox Christian, but very ecumenically minded with a Roman name, and having trained after Harvard Medical School at the Jesuit University, Loyola University Chicago School of Medicine. So I always had this duality, both in my two mother tongues, one being Greek, the other being English, and then having this perspective that somehow those two worlds, East and West, Greece, Europe, and the United States, were actually part of my DNA, to put it, more plainly in a sense. But it could actually be true that there was something very significant that my parents and this upbringing, having been born a US citizen, raised abroad in Greece, really gave me this different perspective, both for academia, for science, but also for how science and religion connects with God, and the fact that your shows is really telling that we are created in the image of God, and even if we are theologians or even if we're scientists, so this is still, I'm sorry about that, this is still something that makes us who we are, and we are not just scientists or just academic scholars or just people who believe that we're created in the image and likeness, as we usually like to add, of God. So I think that the fact that those worlds, again, united, my parents really tried to teach us their love and passion for history, but also for science, for Greece and the Byzantine, era, the continuation of the Roman Empire, and also this foundation in philosophy that really made our country, the United States, from our founding fathers, what it became. I think that are things that are essential in who I am today. And it was indeed, just to close this first chapter with that, and not even in my wildest dreams, I would have imagined, although I did come as a kid to Harvard, that one day I would not only have graduated from Harvard and also a valedictorian, but also having had the amazing privilege to teach at such an institution, to do research with other amazing people. So I think all of those things, elements or parameters, to put it in the research language, I think made me essentially who I am today, and I'm always learning. So I think that's the most important thing. I am a better person today than I was yesterday because of something a student of mine said or shared with me, or I heard from a very impromptu conversation in a market basket. So I think that there's always stimuli, and it's up to us to try to look for that common good in general, but especially within medicine and academia.
Well, that's fascinating, and I love the way you've explained a lot of that and unpacked it, both at the deeply personal level and at a more broad level. And as I'm reflecting on your unique situation of having, grandparents come from Greece, and then you being born in America, but going back to Greece and then ending up in America, and I'm reflecting on my own experience where I think my audience knows, I think I was kidnapped as a child and dropped into a Swedish family without speaking a word of the language. I have the name Franson, but suddenly I'm this little American kid transplanted into Sweden for 2.5 years, just enough to get really, habituated and fitting into the school system there and everything, and completely fluent. My younger sister actually forgot how to speak English while she was there. And so by the time we came back, she couldn't speak English, but now I'm dumped back in an American school. So I have a little bit of this, you might call it almost schizophrenia, but it is very powerful. And I'm amazed at how often this little sun and moon thing behind my head here comes into play. You have the sunrise in the east, and then in theory, you have the west mirroring back the sun, right? In the west, despite being a quasi Judeo-Christian nation, we're very materialistic. And even though many people are religious, they go to church on Easter and Christmas, or they used to, they may not even do that today. Very materialistic. And yet in the East, you go into some of those nations of India and traditionally, in Asia, very deeply spiritual, right? The point is, I've been reflecting a lot on how the Word of God, as revealed through the messengers and the holy writings, is like the divine curriculum, and the creation itself is like the laboratory. Right. So you get the lesson and then you're sent to the lab and the professor says, please don't blow anything up. Right. As you mix your concoctions in the lab so that's what's really going on, and science and religion should be hand in glove and should work together. And my point is, in summarizing all of this, in that garden, there's also a serpent who's casting doubt and challenging the official revealed teaching. And then Adam and Eve have to deal with their doubt, make a decision, and we often make the wrong one, and we end up learning in the school of hard knocks, right? But eventually God can make it all worked out despite the trials and tribulations. But if you already have this sort of conflict inherent in yourself, where you're able to, and this is the final point on wrapping up what you said, adopting a humble posture of learning, where every day you're learning something through the inputs of other people or something in the laboratory, in the working world, in the geopolitical world around us, where we're observing, we're learning. But having the ability to look at both sides and contrast it is very critically important.
Absolutely. And you actually made me think of one of my favorite quotes that I think speaks to this duality, but how we should be looking at those, religion and science as one. And it is from a book that is called, in the acronym is Flow, For the Life of the World, towards the social ethos of the Orthodox Church from an ecumenical perspective. So the quote is, "The desire for scientific knowledge draws from the same wellspring as faith's longing to enter ever more deeply into the mystery of God." So I think this is really fascinating, and I use this a lot in my teaching, and also I've published using that as well in bioethics, because I think for decades, if not centuries, humanity had this antagonism or antithesis, right? Or dichotomy, so many good Greek words. On one hand, it was, if you're a scientist, you have to be an atheist, or at least, not having the control of faith, or let's say the Pope if you're a Catholic, right? Or the ecumenical patriarch if you're Orthodox. And then on the other hand, if you were a good, faithful, let's say Christian, but in any religion, I think it was similar, then of course you have to either be afraid of, let's say, the bad atheist scientists, or God forbid, if you become one, then you have to be really, really careful to make sure you keep everything, where it should be, keep everyone in their lanes, as we say. But I think this has been so erroneous. Has been ill-advised, because now part of what we're doing in our wonderful group, but also across other institutions in the United States, we see more and more in the literature, we have data to support, and I will give you examples from medicine, that not only are science and religion supposed to be, minding their own business, which is an expression I don't really like. We should be, caring about other people's business in a good way, but they actually can inform one another, and they can help one another, and they can help eventually us. So we see that there was an amazing paper co-authored by many of my colleagues, led by Tracy Balboni, in one of the best journals in the world called JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that came out in August of 22. And that was a landmark study. It was a systematic review of almost 9,000 studies that looked into the role of spirituality in general, broadly conceived, not just religion, but spirituality, and its impact, the positive effect, positive correlation in serious illness. And we have a trove of good data, very representative, very reliable data, again, from 9,000 studies that mentioned some kind of effect. And we know that for the patients who do believe in God, who do believe that their faith can help them cope better when they have a serious illness, let's take a very difficult, tragic stage for cancer, for example. That very fact that they believe that because of their own spirituality, things will be better, we know that they do get better. And what is even more striking to me is that from our data, we can show that even the clinicians, the medical team, even when they are not religious or spiritual themselves, but when they do realize that their patients have this desire, this longing to have at least some basic acknowledgement or accommodation of their religious or spiritual needs within spiritual care, the chaplains, right, at the hospitals, but even the physicians who might not see it the same way, when they do accommodate, then things get better for their patients. And then when the physicians are religious or spiritual themselves, and for example, they can even pray on the bedside for a very serious situation, then the whole, in a synergy almost of sorts, the entire situation medically is improved. Either they can cope better, the patients and their families can cope better, or in some cases of those many, many thousand studies, they can live a little bit longer while feeling that they have hope, because they know that it is not the end of everything. Sometimes it is a threshold, as we believe as Christians, it is a threshold, even death. And in Easter, that's what we say, that by death, Christ has conquered death, that there is a threshold for something else. So that doesn't mean that we have to let our patients die, but it means that whenever there is serious illness, we have the data to support that this spirituality and religious desire is actually healthy to be discussed and incorporated in the way we do medicine. And that's why I love the Good Samaritan parable, which of course we can talk at some point, because it shows in the purest form how caring for one another when they are injured, when they're sick, should be done.
So before we get into that, so thank you so much. I could just sit here and listen to you through the whole show, but I also want to make sure we connect a few dots. So you've given us a great overview of who you are and your perspective, but tell us a little bit about how you went from being born in Greece to playing the role that you now play at Harvard and with these other institutions. So what was the training involved there and the specific path you took?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this back to where we should be, doing that chronologically. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to say a little bit more, because indeed, I think on one hand, it wasn't orchestrated, which I think is important for people to know. I didn't just wake up one day when I was in elementary school saying, I would really want to become a professor or to be, at Harvard. I think there was a lot of serendipity involved and many, many different, catalysts that in a meandering fashion, which is another Greek word, it took me from one direction to the other, and then eventually made me want to more seriously first pursue doctoral studies, right? That's one way of going into becoming a professor or in academia, a researcher, a scientist. But then on the other hand, it made me realize that, hey, I would like to help people and serve humanity essentially, through something that had to do with ethics and medicine. I did start from sport medicine, so that was the meandering part. Kinesiology, which is the study of the human body and movement. I was a competitive athlete myself. I was training for the Olympic Games. I was national champion of Greece and the Balkans, so Southeastern Europe.
Which discipline?
And it was mountain biking. So that was my favorite sport. We had just become an Olympic sport, by the way, when I won my first junior men's championship in 1996. So it was introduced as an Olympic event, Olympic discipline of cycling in the Atlanta Games. And that's when I said, whoa, maybe I can pursue down that path and become a professional, which I also did. I became a semi-professional, but with always having in mind that I was a very good student in school. My parents did not want me to waste my academic talent in competitive sports, although I was doing good, right? So they were trying to say, they were very hesitant. So I knew that I could do very well in this. Let me see where it goes. But then, thanks to many broken bones and some accidents where I was hospitalized as a result of this competitive pursuit, right? And it was a dangerous sport, mountain biking, going up and down mountains, sometimes at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour. But anyway, I can tell you more if you want. But through this pursuit for the Olympic Games, I knew that on the other hand, I was a good student. So I wanted to do something with, not only a first degree, but, master's and doctoral studies. And I knew that, like my parents who had taught at the university level, I wanted to do the same. And my parents had studied in the United States primarily. So I knew that I want to get some studies done in Greece, and I went to the Aristotle University, which actually Aristotle himself founded in the original version, 2,500 years ago. But then I wanted to get this graduate education, like my parents had done before me, in the United States. And I didn't even need a visa. So I knew that that was really great. So I think those two elements, one, I wanted to understand how does the human body and human performance work from within the body. I want to understand the anatomy and physiology and biomechanics and all this interesting, cool stuff. But I was interested in the ethical way to do this. So because of my sport, mountain biking and cycling as a whole, maybe from the 90s, it was tarnished by so many scandals with doping, performance-enhancing drugs. So I think that element together with sport medicine brought me closer to bioethics. But then after having done that almost as a career for years in the United States, now fast forward to when I came for graduate studies, and I went to some great schools like Harvard, but for sport medicine and kinesiology, Springfield College, Massachusetts, and the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And then having taught in upstate New York as a professor doing that and training those future coaches, athletic trainers, sport medicine, physicians and all that, I felt that I wanted to do something broader. How can I help, humanity and through my science, more people? How can I show others how to be better when they are a physician or when they are a coach, but not only for athletes, to help people prevent disease in general. You can do this through exercise, or rehabilitate injuries, or someone with a cardiomyopathy. You mentioned that, I know, when we're discussing. But you can also do this as a rehabilitation through exercise too. That's adaptive sport medicine and sport medicine. But I wanted to be more broad again. So I think that was a really big turning point, together with one other important detail that I can mention later, that happened in my life. But that was the turning point where I realized, I want to switch profession essentially from kinesiology and sport medicine, going to medicine and bioethics and public health. So I went back to grad school after having 3 degrees already. I started Harvard Medical School. I did what I usually say, my secular bioethics training. I started teaching, but then I did my theologically based other graduate training and final 1/5 degree at a Jesuit institution, Loyola University Chicago School of Medicine. And I think this is where I realized, you know what? I not only want to live my faith as an Orthodox Christian, again, very ecumenically minded, having trained by Catholics at the Jesuit school, I want to do this as my work in bioethics and training physician scientists. And so that's, I think, where I think I was waiting for many years, and hello to our friend who's visiting there, who's visiting you. I think that this is where I realized that, that's my true calling in life. One is to teach, which I love. I have a passion for that. But also to be in this specific, to bring my own faith and spirituality, the theological basis and foundation, into the work of bioethics, which is broad, but it includes philosophy, theology, the law, and the social sciences for human flourishing. So essentially, that's always the goal.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into our first commercial break, which is a little video that will describe the organization and the work that you're doing at Harvard. And when we come back from this very quick video break, while I also deal with this large animal that started attacking me while you were talking, we will dig into a little bit more that essence of where that comes from, how it applies. And I also want to talk a little bit about the systematic, let's call it the medical industrial complex that exists, and how your work in ethics, where does that apply in different ways at the sort of systemic level, the economic, the policy level, but also at the individual level of that practitioner who's actually seeing the patients. So much more to come. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this interlude with more of Kosti Psimopoulos on Created in the Image of God.
Thanks.
And based on a review of the literature published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, I would propose four central pathways to flourishing. And those are work, education, family, and religious community. Evidence from many studies that these things are common in the population, both here in the United States, but also globally, that each of these powerfully affects those flourishing outcomes.
We've been approached and we work with government institutions, companies, universities, religious institutions, all hungry for human flourishing in their organizations.
My motivation for doing this work on human flourishing and directing the human flourishing program really arises from a deep conviction that if, as individuals and as a society, we were to make flourishing the aim of life, what we are seeking individually, what we are seeking in our communities, what we are seeking nationally and internationally in our governments, that it would profoundly improve who we are as people, who we are as a human community.
So there's a video overview of the world in which you're operating. Give us a little verbal overlay of what that component of Harvard does and how you fit into it.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to be working with those amazing individuals who comprise the Human Flourishing Program, led by and founded by my wonderful colleague, Tyler Vanderveel, who really saw that Harvard was really lacking this integrated approach to not only health and well-being, but even beyond human flourishing. And to give you a clue, before telling you more specifics, there are the Human Flourishing Program itself has more Christian ethicists than the entire divinity school at Harvard. And I'm one of them. So I'm a Christian bioethicist. I usually say that this is my specific area. But Tyler Vanderveel is a biostatistician and epidemiologist mathematician, philosopher, and theologian who did all of that. Again, speaking of meandering approaches and multidisciplinarity, as we say, who realized that, the divinity school at Harvard does not really talk to the medical school, and the medical school doesn't talk back to the divinity school, or even the school of public health talking to someone, let's say, who wants to do theology or chaplaincy or spiritual care. And that was now the year 2009. So with a group of two other friends, they started what is now the initiative, which is part of our Human Flourishing, the Initiative on Health, Spirituality, and Religion, to bring those three schools together. And of course, from there emerged the bigger now Human Flourishing program out of three people, an epidemiologist, a theologian, and his wife, a radiation oncologist, who both felt that their faith was and should be part of their academic work to make medicine better, to make the study of well-being and epidemiology better. They actually then brought in psychologists, philosophers, psychiatrists, biostatisticians, and bioethicists, and with a lot of funding that came from specific sources. We don't need to name them specifically, but with a lot of funding came even more opportunities to do longitudinal work, as we say, so study the phenomenon of how do people flourish in their lives and what is flourishing, and then study that across the world. And now, fast forward, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary in just a week. We have done what is called the Global Flourishing Study, looking into the 5 important domains of flourishing. The first one being physical and mental health. That's a domain. Second is happiness and life satisfaction. The third one is meaning and purpose in life. Fourth, virtue and character. And the fifth, close social relationships. And all of those 5 domains are first universally desired, so apply to all people or as many people as we're studying. And second, and most importantly, they are what we call intrinsic goods. So they are not means to other ends, but they are ends in themselves. They are sought as ends, or telos from Aristotle's teleology. So they're an aim or an end in themselves. And only financial well-being and financial security is a means where we can try to pursue the other 5 ends in themselves, which I mentioned. So we've done a global flourishing study looking into 200,000 people, 200,000 participants from 20 countries from around the world, looking into how do people in different countries, in different cultures, from different backgrounds flourish based on those 5 domains, which is really fascinating, and it had never been done in all of almost 400-year Harvard history.
Well, as I reflect on this, and I'm thinking about the problems and challenges that face us as a species today, you and I talked very briefly about COVID in the context of COVID now being symbolic of the challenge we face at the societal level of how to administer, let's call it healthcare, preventative medicine, which I don't know if vaccines are really preventative medicine or not. You may have an opinion on that. But the point is, we have this medical industrial complex, and there's a high degree of specialization everywhere. And, somebody will, to use an example, this is just a data point, right? My daughter is going to college. She had to watch this movie about college debt, right? Student debt, to try to advise the students going into college to be careful, to make wise decisions. And in this movie, there was an orthopedic or an orthodontal surgeon, right? A dental surgeon.
Orthodontist, yes, orthodontist surgeon, yes, yeah.
So he had gone down this path, and he kept having to take on more and more debt as he went through the program, and he got to the point of about $600,000. And then he still had to do an internship, right? So he had to get additional debt. And at this point in time, it's like, what are you going to do? You've already sunk $600,000 into pursuing this career in the fantasy that you're going to pay off this debt with the expertise and the skill that you learn. By the time he was done, he was $1 million in debt. And his monthly payment on the interest was $6,000. And this guy broke down in tears on camera because he said, I will never be able to pay off this debt. His life was ruined by pursuing this degree in this very specialized thing. Now, in the hospitals and clinics and everything, there's also a lot of technology and equipment which is expensive and has to be paid for. Now in the corporate world, there's this thing called tech debt, right? Where you invest in technology for a purpose. It maybe meets the goal, and maybe doesn't, maybe returns on the investment, maybe doesn't. But you've got all this sunk investment, and now technology is changing and you need to move to something new and different, but you've already invested in all this tech debt, right? So these are systemic problems. Now the fascinating thing, the image that I got, referring back to Greece, Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot, right? The Gordian, I kind of imagined this Institute for Human Flourishing and the cross-disciplinary inputs from religion, psychology, ethics, and so on, is Alexander the Great with his sword cutting through the Gordian knot, right? So let's get back to bedrock by asking, what is health and wellness? What is human flourishing? And your 5 disciplines, to me, represented a reset button on the whole thing we've built, that today, one can question this thing we've built.
Absolutely. And thank you. There's a lot there to unpack, but I think I can try to focus on first the most significant, and maybe if you will allow me to be a little bit provocative, as at least some of my mentors have taught me well, but I try to always do this from a point of humility, of course, right? But I think that in a nutshell, we have to take the mercenaries out of healthcare. So I think this is actually
amen. Hallelujah.
Very significant. Hallelujah. Yes.
Which gets back to the Good Samaritan, right? Why are you doing this, and who's it for? And but then the question is, who are the mercenaries, right? So for example, now I'm going to be provocative about higher education in general, right? So I'm going down a tangent, but this is interesting, right? So this debt, right? Now, if you were in the corporate world, the degree is a product that you're buying, and
we're a consumer, which is
right.
Also
so this person spent $1 million to get this product, and there were 2 reasons for this product. One is obviously to help people and do good, but also for himself and to earn his livelihood, right? Well, this product was defective because this product was so expensive, it couldn't fill the purpose, right? It's like buying a bus when you needed a Prius, right, to go long distance. It's overkill. It's too much. So now student debt, therefore, there's this move to forgive student debt. And a lot of people blame the evil lenders who are lending this money.
Yeah.
But root cause analysis tells me, no, it's a product deficiency, and the manufacturer of the product is responsible, which is higher education. From whose pocket did the money come?
Yeah.
And into whose pocket is it going? It's not the lenders. It's coming from the consumer's pocket into the pocket of the higher education institution, which probably has $1 billion endowment already, right? And so the idea of forgiving student debt, no, let's go back and make the higher educational system help solve the problem. And if you don't, you will never fix it.
Exactly. And let me give you some examples.
And all of that was just by your word. Who is the mercenary in all this?
Yeah.
Because the Apostle Paul said, you should not muzzle the ox that treads out the grain. There's nothing wrong with everybody in the system earning a decent living. And if you're going to have to go spend 6 years of your life and also incur some debt to get the degree, you should be rewarded on the other end of it. You should be able to provide for your family, you know. But anyway, go ahead. Back over to you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Because let me start by connecting it. I was baptized at a monastery, which is there from the 12th century, on the very spot where the Apostle Paul preached to the Thessalonians. So I was raised in Thessaloniki. So this to me is very significant. But the Apostle Paul really went from the east to the west so that he will actually tell and teach and preach to the Western world, essentially, Christianity and a better way of looking at things and the most important things in life. And I think that if you look at things from the beginning with just some very tangible examples, I will give you one from Sweden. Since you mentioned Sweden, I have two siblings who have been living there for many years. And one of them did an entire master's degree for free. So they didn't, have to pay for anything because this applies to European citizens. The same in Greece. And I'm not saying that, there are not issues, there are no other issues and everything is wonderful, but higher education can be free. It is free. I have one degree and I didn't pay anything from the Aristotle University. Granted, again, everyone needs more resources to have better labs, etc. But the education can work. So this is one system. The same with the hospitals. I have been hospitalized, as I was saying, thanks to, but God helped me not have worse accidents, but thanks to the different accidents while training. And neither I nor my parents paid for my hospitalization bills because healthcare is free. So isn't that an example, a model that we can take in the United States, since we've taken the best that happens, either in antiquity like Rome and Greece and Jerusalem, but also what happens in other countries, and tailor it around our needs, but adopt it to our United States system and a better system, which we know can exist. So the question to who is the mercenaries, I think we're allowing essentially the worship of a system, and mammon is the worship of capital, of money. We're allowing that to happen to ourselves. And it goes beyond who we vote for, which of course is an important thing. As Aristotle said, human is a political animal because we do exist in a polis. The
more kind and gentle way is a social creature, right? But political animal, yes, that's a two-edged sword. I like that.
I said it because you have an animal on your lap. So yeah. I believe that we are, human animals. The others are non-human animals. And within bioethics, by the way, we really care a lot about animal ethics because of how research is done, right? To save us or to produce life-saving pharmaceuticals. But we are experimenting with those non-human animals. So there is a whole set of ethics, which is administered by what is called IACUC, about how to treat more humane, but how to treat the animals that we use for research, for medicine and all of healthcare. But I think that we have to change the way we do medicine. And it goes from not only who should be paying or who pays or why do we pay enormous amounts for healthcare, but how do we train the future physicians and nurses all in healthcare? One of my professors recently wrote a book, and he's a psychiatrist by training, has taught medical education, so future doctors and physicians, for 40 years. And the title of the book is The Soul of Care. And he's arguing that, unfortunately, in his 4-decade experience, the way we train future physicians is done very poorly because in many occasions, and this is verbatim how he says it, the care So how we care as humans, that the capacity to care that some medical students have before they enter medical education, their medical schools, is better, higher than what they have coming out of the medical school with their degrees in medicine. So this apparently speaks volumes of how poorly, for many reasons, we do in medical education in the United States and even in the best institutions. That's not a resource problem, right? It has to do with what the philosophy that we have in medical education, and it extends all the way to, and that's a problem, to what kind of specialties are being chosen and where. For example, if I enter cardiology, then I might go to a big metropolis. Some, prospective medical student is thinking, right? I'm just giving an example. And then I can get the most income I can possibly, because I could be a cardiologist seeing thousands of patients who will always need a cardiologist. And I think it's a vicious cycle. If you choose your specialty, which should be a ministry to care for others, with the consideration being how much money am I going to make, or because I have to pay close to $1 million in debt, I want to pay this off as quickly as possible. So that means I'm not going to care about the poorest patient or the health desert, the medical desert that is a big issue in our United States, in this country. And I'm never going to go, for example, to Franklin, Mississippi, one of the poorest places in the country. But I will go to the place where that will pay me better. So that means I will be a successful doctor. This is wrong. We have to stop having this perspective that we encourage our future professionals, future doctors and nurses who want to enter the profession, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons, but that's not their fault. It's how we let the system perpetuate. So I think
it's the system of systems.
Yeah, and it changes the way from a systems ethics, and that's another area we look into bioethics. We also look into organizational ethics. How does the healthcare institution functions as an industry in itself? Unless we change those elements, right, then we're not really going to take those, mercenaries and make them unmercenaries, like the saints, Cosmas and Damien, who treated patients for free.
Right. Wow, so much there. I want to go down one other path to talk about another big societal issue and address that from a certain perspective. And that societal issue is the opioid epidemic, right? And specifically having, I'm no expert, but I've watched a few documentaries, so now I know a lot, right? But I'm joking, but still you can discern, right? So one of the things that I realized was that rather than treating the actual condition, problem, the health, the sickness, pain itself began to be treated. Pain was the problem, right? So there was a reconditioning in the minds of patients and doctors. A patient would come in and self-diagnose on that little chart on the wall with the frowny face and the happy face, the scale of 1 to 10 of pain. And if you were an 8, you would get the drugs, right? You would basically get, the opioid, right? The heroin, right? And the narcotic. And the thing I want to address is this shift away to relieving suffering, right? That became the focus, alleviating suffering. This focus was not to help the patient get well. The focus was not to help the patient flourish, right? And it was a very narrow, and here's a quick fix, right? Here's the short circuit of everything in your life. Let's short circuit your whole life by giving you this narcotic that makes you feel good.
Yeah. I will start again with a quote that I think connects very well to the point that you're making, Wade, which is a very critical one. My beloved late professor Paul Farmer said this: the idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong in the world. And so I think this is so central to how we see other lives from our neighbors, our citizens, but everyone who is made in the image, created in the image and likeness of God, with human dignity and this inherent moral worth. So if we decide that some lives are not as significant or as important than others, or like our own, like with arrogance, and or some areas of marginalized brothers and sisters of ours are not to be healed, but rather some of the symptoms to be treated, right? And then if we make this decision, I think we're going down a very dangerous and immoral path. However, on the other side, if we decide that we have to treat the root causes of the systemic manifestation of needing different drugs, or harmful and hazardous alcohol and other drug use, as we say it, as we discuss it in the literature. And then if we see, and we have now data from a study that just came out, and I want to just mention that because it connects to opioids, but also alcohol and other drug use, we have seen from a meta-analysis that we've done, so we've looked into a total of 540,721, more than 500,000 people from a meta-analysis across all the studies that were done, longitudinal studies, mentioning spirituality and alcohol and other drug use. And we found up to an 18% protective effect of spirituality into essentially decreasing or stopping, interrupting the use of drugs, of drug use or alcohol, who are harmful or hazardous, of course. And so we know that we can approach the treatment from a preventive perspective, as you mentioned. And spirituality, since we're talking about this as the emphasis, can really help. We have a wonderful study from one of my colleagues from Duke University, who is actually looking into opioid use in Appalachia. And so there are, and he's a theologian as well as a bioethicist. So there are ways to deal with the problem by looking into the person, the person as patient, not just statistics, and to see what is it that we are not doing well in the way that our communities function. We're not looking into the flourishing, as you did mention as well, and we're seeing that from a literature, from our research, that there are other ways that we can be doing more effectively, we can be working on more effectively, and spirituality can have a huge protective effect. That doesn't mean that it's a panacea, it's not going to solve everything, but we have to think differently, not only outside of the box, but think as if there is no box. So I think that's one of the solutions, and not necessarily pouring money into more drugs. That's definitely not going to be a long-term solution. We have to be wiser than that and go to the root causes of these structural elements in society at large.
Well, yeah, and when we sit down, we'll often watch some things on Amazon Prime, which has advertising in it. And there's just so many advertisements about drugs. So no, there's not root cause. They're coming up with ever more esoteric drugs to treat every imaginable little condition and illness, right? More and more drugs proliferating for all these different things. You follow me?
Yes.
And yeah, it's a massive industry. But we're gonna take a quick commercial break. we're going to go to a little ad that will focus more on this spiritual element. When we come back, I want to ask you to be now forward-looking. Where is your research going? Where is this field maybe taking us? What should we be thinking about in a forward-looking way? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to wrap up this interview with Kosti Psimopoulos, a bioethicist at Harvard.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional, bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth. God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of One. Many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
Reflecting on how that approach in that little book takes what we were talking about in your field of bringing together these different perspectives into one and forming a unity out of it. So let's now talk a little bit about the forward-looking. So the institution you're a part of was founded about 10 years ago. You've been making progress. You've identified these different domains that are all part of human flourishing. What is next on the horizon? Where are you and that organization growing next?
Yeah, there are many areas. So I will mention three specific ones. So one is looking into flourishing within academic institutions, which is really fascinating because essentially, and the Wall Street Journal, just to name some, something that is very, many people know, is actually already has published something that came out of our program. And we're essentially looking into potentially not or shying away, moving away from using the rankings as we know them in academic institutions that usually have to do with success being determined by monetary rewards or just statistics having to do with who got better income after graduating or who donated as alumni, essentially. But looking into the institutional flourishing, so academic flourishing within the institution. And now we have this new approach. It's not a ranking, so we want to try to call it differently, to use a different characterization for this. But at that different kind of ranking, for example, to give you an example, is some of the institutions that are Christian-based score much higher. Others that are secular, like, for example, the University of Chicago, is much, much higher than the Ivy Leagues. And you have to question, why is it that this happens? And we're trying to see if the mission of the institutions align with the degree to which the students, the faculty, and the staff, the university campus as a whole is indeed flourishing or not. So that's one area. I think we have to look beyond the ranking systems that we have been using, and that could apply to a healthcare institution, right? Is this a good or a not so good? We don't have to be antagonistic in terms of, a non-profit institution is doing an X amount of service. So let's try to also be as for-profit as we can to beat that other institution. That's not healthy competition. That's not noble competition. That's not fair play. That's not ethical. So another way that the program, the Human Flourishing program, is doing something really fascinating, and I would say almost unorthodox in a good sense, is that we're looking into forgiveness as not medicine, but in lieu of medicine. Forgiveness can help societies flourish and overcome, let's say, a medical approach to relationships that need to be curated, need to be cared differently. So forgiveness is a big area of inquiry. And then another really big one that I'm very passionate about as well is to connect love as an element of human flourishing. And we have so much, right? Specifically from the Apostle Paul and Corinthians to that effect. But also we're studying that scientifically now as an element of flourishing in society. And I think this connects so much to what we need to do differently as part of bioethics. And we have the principle of beneficence, to do the right thing, right? Or as Hippocrates would say, non-maleficence, at least do no harm. But how can we actually not just care better and look into the soul of medicine, as I mentioned, but love, have true love, agape love, which is the original name for love, not the eros love or the philia, but agape love, this love that is unselfish, that is compassionate, and to have this kind of approach to all people, but specifically to the patients, and look at them as persons who are created in the image of God first, and then as statistics or their disease, right? To look at the person first, and the same language we use for those who live with disabilities. So I think those are some of the exciting things that we can introduce through this human flourishing program, but other institutions are also emulating what you do. And I mentioned already the University of Chicago as well. So I think those are the exciting things that I'm really looking forward to in the future, to change the way we see medicine and we do medicine, and we train the future physicians and those in healthcare.
Wow. Well, there's so much more I want to ask, but we're pretty much out of time. I do want to just bring in a couple of audience comments as well before we move on. There've been quite a few comments throughout. We only have time to pull out a couple. Here's one, going back to that sort of COVID question, and there's a lot of debate in this country right now about the recent choice, and for the overall health system from a government perspective. I don't want to name names here and get into politics, but a lot of debate around this, and specifically on the topic of vaccines. Here, Go Hawks wants to know, I'd love to hear his take on the vaccine. And I think the vaccine, I think he's talking about the COVID vaccine, but maybe vaccines in general. No, we don't like to get into the deepest controversy. We're not trying to, feed the algorithm and incite, rabid, trolling and discussion on these topics. But what's your position on the vaccine and vaccines generally, if you don't mind me asking?
No, of course. I will answer. I will first say, as a good, humble bioethicist should say, I'm not an epidemiologist, right? So I'm not the expert in general from a scientific perspective. But as just an academic and as a Christian, I think I will give one example that I think speaks to the heart of the issue, which has to do with choice, how we choose to approach science. I will just extrapolate to all of science, but all vaccines. I would say all of the vaccines, but with the opportunity of COVID-19 specifically. I will say this: there was a lot of different perspectives from within the church, and I've experienced that as well. And I have many friends who, let's say, are priests or theologians, right, who were adamant against any kind of vaccination for COVID. And they felt that that was the right thing to do, the Christian and morally appropriate thing to do. However, at the same time, there were other more conservative voices that you would imagine would probably say the same within, I'm talking specifically about the Orthodox Christian Church and in Greece, but also in the United States, who you would expect, again, more conservative voices, but who would say, no, we have to listen to the epidemiologists. The doctors, they would say, but it's really the epidemiologists, those in public health and specifically in infectious disease. We have to listen to those experts because we are not experts ourselves. And it's somewhere some point you have to draw the line. And essentially, it's a matter of trust. But I think one of the faults with COVID-19, but the errors, the erroneous or ill-advised practices, was that we did not develop trustworthiness because of all the other things, political decisions or partisan decisions that have been done in the United States leading up to COVID-19, that I think then it was so hard for people, especially those who were not in medicine themselves or epidemiology, but were listening to these two main opposing views, not necessarily in the two opposing parties, right? But opposing views from within the church or within science even. And they were trying desperately to say, who can I trust? Can I trust this epidemiologist, let's say from Stanford, or the other from the other institution? And so I think it was really a matter of trust for the vaccine, right, for COVID-19. And so because we failed as scientists and as academics many times, and that's why bioethics exists, we fail many times to have this to cultivate the trustworthiness, so that when it is the right time, when the good science can speak, then people should or could trust it. So I would say that, and I want to be a little bit more broad. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to kind of build on that a little bit, this issue of trust. And even the word vaccine, on an American government website, the definition of vaccine was changed over the rollout of the vaccine and the lockdowns and everything. So, and by the way, I'm also no health expert at all, but I've had reason and cause to spend years of my life focused on personal health. Diagnosed with a chronic crippling disease at age 28, and doctors who said there's no cure, and then having it go in complete remission, being kind of a miracle patient in that sense, but having learned certain things, one of which was I never, ever took the flu vaccine. I've never been vaccinated for the flu. And my basic position or reasoning is that it's not a vaccine in the first place. Right? The flu vaccine is not a vaccine. It's called a vaccine. And maybe it falls within some definition of vaccine, but the classic definition as I understood it was, no, it's not going to prevent me from getting the condition or the illness. It's going to prepare my immune system potentially to be ready to fight it more quickly or whatever. It's basically supercharging my immune system with an external agent that, in my view, ultimately is weakening my immune system over time. Now, I could be completely wrong about that, but that's my position, and I don't trust anything anybody says about it, because even the definition of the word is in question, as is the motive of creating a treatment that you have to take every year for the rest of your life to prevent you from getting ill. You follow me? There's a whole lot of stuff wrapped up in all that. And the COVID vaccine was of a kind with the flu vaccine. It's the same. And again, I'm not a medical expert and somebody's going to, dramatically criticize me, but it's in the same general family of things, let's say.
Yeah. It's
a similar situation when it comes to calling it a vaccine.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of a loss of trust if we can't even trust the words that are being used. And why are they being used? And why aren't we calling it something different or differentiating between this kind of a vaccine versus this kind of a preventative shot? You follow me.
Yes, and I can introduce maybe something in a joking manner, but it could be also more serious because we use so many Greek words in science and medicine, right? Diagnosis is a Greek word, schizophrenia. Right. But the word in Greek could work based on what you're just suggesting. And the word is emvolion. And emvolion actually is the process of injecting something in your arm. So That could be an alternative for the vaccine that is charged maybe for many people in a bad way. But then at the same time, I would say we do know, though, there are statistics that there are lives lost, specifically of children lives, who are unvaccinated for the flu. And, many people can argue for one perspective. And again, I'm not speaking as an expert because I'm not an epidemiologist, right? But as a father, I was thinking that would you want to just take the risk that some kids, because of the way our metabolism works or our DNA is predisposed, are going to survive a virus such as the flu, which is very simple, right? But it could be deadly. Or use something that we know could potentially save your kid's life. And we know that I think it's close to 10,000 children in the United States die every year because of the flu. So I think that we have to try to consider the perspective based on the data.
Of course, the counter argument to that would simply be there are also X number of children who drown. There are also X number of children who fall off a skateboard and kill themselves, or a mountain bike, right? And so the argument breaks down when we sort of catastrophize and take this outlier and then apply a systemic remedy without really fully understanding what are the implications. Let's take the lockdowns, for example, right? You could stop all contagious disease by isolating all of us from each other. You follow me? So that's where, to me, that argument completely breaks down, and it's kind of it's like a trump card, right? We're saving a life. Is it worth it that one person, if only one person dies, is that person's life worth less?
Yes.
You follow me? I don't think it's a fair argument, to be honest.
No, in terms of the lives lost,
it's an important principle.
Yeah.
That you're raising. I'm not just negating your point. You follow me?
Yeah.
This is what we were talking about earlier, is that these are complex.
Yeah.
And this is why I love that you're talking about human flourishing, because there are many, many things we could do to prevent harm, injury, that would diminish the capacity of our species to flourish completely and totally.
Absolutely. And then the conflicting principle, for example, exactly in what you're saying, that we have in bioethics. On one hand, we have beneficence, how to try to do the right thing, to save lives if you can. But on the other hand, we have what is called non-maleficence, to try to at least avoid harm, which goes back all the way to the Hippocratic Oath, that how sometimes there is conflict in those two. And that's, the tension that we see in bioethics.
Well, and allow me to go deep here into theology for a moment. And you may not have heard this particular analogy. My audience, it's something I've been developing over the last 3, 4, 5 months.
Okay.
If we go back to the Garden of Eden, clearly the omniscient God, the God of Genesis 1, who has all the omnis in his word, omniscient, omnipotent. Right? The God who, again, referring to the sun and the moon here, puts the greater and lesser lights in heaven for seasons, signs, times, right? There you have the scientific evidence that God created time space, right? Through the movement of solar bodies, which Einstein later figured out. This omnipotent God created the universe. Then in Genesis 2, you have a God who is very loving and kind and directly engaged. He comes down with his own hands, he shapes out of the dust a man, and then he breathes mouth to mouth resuscitation, life into, and he takes the rib of that man to create a companion for that man and says, you two are one flesh. It's a very, very different God, right? But now this omniscient, omnipotent God puts these beings in a garden, beautiful garden, and says, don't eat of this tree because in the day you eat of it, you're going to die. Then that same God gives them a serpent to cast out and get them to eat the stupid tree, right? Causing the so-called fall and every aspect of human misery. And then he curses the woman and says, you shall have pain and suffering in childbirth, and she does because her firstborn son grows up and kills her other son. That's pain in childbirth. What's my point here? My point is God did that. God is the cause of all this suffering, right? And then to solve it all, he sends his own son. And then there's this strange verse that says Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered. What? Now you have the Apostle Paul, and this is the part that maybe is new and you haven't heard. The Apostle Paul says that you're not even weaned. You guys, you're drinking milk. You're immature. You should be eating meat. You should be teachers by now. Strong meat belongs to those who, by reason of use, have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. So Paul goes back to that forbidden tree and says you should now be eating of that fruit. And when I shared this with a prominent theologian at Princeton, her response was, "That's not biblical." I'm like, well, it might not be theologically accurate in your world, but I just read it from the Bible. I pulled it straight out of the Bible. I'm convinced that the Apostle Paul is saying, hey, it's time to eat of that fruit with the Holy Spirit and with wisdom and truly become like God, discerning good and evil. We have, since that time, we have no other choice. Right? Now, but what am I really saying here? Again, the idea of alleviating all suffering, preventing every death, that's not what God signed us up for. There's some limit. This is the ethics, right, of human flourishing. You can't police everybody to stop every conceivable problem.
Yes, there's a lot there, but can I say one more thing from the Apostle, not the Apostle Paul, but from the Good Samaritan parable, which is Luke,
Yes.
as we know. I think at the end, it's something that gives us the choice, because I think suffering is not something that some negative example of malevolent God, because God is love, is never wants us to suffer, but it's always the choice. So at the end of the Good Samaritan parable, it says, Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So I think it is, in as much as it is our choice to go and save the person who is suffering, it is also up to us really to learn from suffering that comes to us, or that because of our choices, we end up suffering in this life. But I think if we do believe that there is kingdom in heaven, there is another better life, eternal life, I think that maybe all suffering in this life has some kind of significance, and there is some point to the suffering that God allows. It never brings suffering to us. So I think that that's the right theological.
No, we absolutely bring it to ourselves. I guess what I'm saying, though, is that the parable is the parable of the Good Samaritan, not the good vigilante, right? It wasn't a vigilante that went after the robbers and hunted them down and killed them like some action movie, right?
Yeah.
Which would have been to eradicate the cause of the problem and the cause of the suffering.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is really, I don't know how much more time we have, but I want, if
we're over time, but we can wrap this up. I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, if I could have the last word for this, because that was our theme. And I know there could be so many angles to talk about the things that we discussed. But if there's one more thing, I think the important thing that connects back to Paul Farmer's quote about the moral worth of different lives is that who is then our neighbor? I think that's how it starts, of course, the Good Samaritan. And if we understand that it is not just the neighbor physically that I know very well, and I either say good morning to or how are you every day or not, right? Even if they are in close proximity to us. But a neighbor can be any person that we come across who happens to be in close proximity to us. And then if we realize that we are actually doing something to Christ himself, if we either choose to help anyone in need, or when we don't, Christ knows that we are not doing it to Christ. I think that's really the biggest point, and that of course connects to Matthew 25. But I think if we choose to go and do likewise, and to see every neighbor having equal moral worth, as we say in the language of bioethics, then I think that's the more theological and bioethically astute and wise thing to do.
Amen. And especially, as you mentioned, the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan in that world was the bad guy. So the reason this story and this parable is so effective is it's a surprise to the audience that are you kidding? The Samaritan? We all know that Samaritans are awful. They are the other people, right? And suddenly it's the Samaritan that's the good guy. And when you reference Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats is what I think you were referring to. What's fascinating to me is both the sheep and the goats said the same thing. They said, "When did we see you?" And to me, the difference is this. How do you be a sheep and not a goat? The goats were trying to discern who was and who wasn't worthy, and they ended up making a bad choice.
Yeah.
The sheep were indiscriminate in their love and their care and their giving. So they were like, "When did we see you?" But it didn't matter because they were treating everybody as though they were Jesus.
Yes, exactly. And that's the point. That's really the point, to see Jesus Christ in the eyes and the psyches of other people, even if we don't know them. So love for the neighbor, love for the stranger, and love for even the enemy.
Amen. Well, we are out of time. What are the final words you'd like to leave for the audience? Or, it's fine if that was already it, but do you have any final thoughts or anything? And how can people, do you want anyone from the audience to get in touch with you or engage with the work that you're doing in some way? Anything you want to share before we sign off tonight?
Yes. So I would first of all like to thank you, Wade, and your show, and all the people who have watched now or will be watching. I know there are thousands of people who watch your shows, and hopefully more will come for this one in the future as well. There are so many resources that anyone, even without a fancy, Harvard Medical School degree as I have behind me, can learn nowadays online. So the Human Flourishing program at Harvard has so many open access, which is great, right? Open access. You don't even have to pay for a journal subscription. You can find all of this data, and you can find more, you can get a better understanding and education on your own, so that you can then discern what is a better way to flourish. So that's one. Another is, if they want to contact me through the Human Flourishing program, they can find also my email and my website. A simple Google search can help you as well. But the most important thing is, I think, for the audience who want to find out more about human flourishing or bioethics, who are also interested in people, humans created in the image of God, is to understand that theology, religion, and spirituality can go hand in hand with science and academic scholarship. They shouldn't be one or the other. So I think that's the important message. And again, from a very humble Orthodox Christian, a Greek American, I think that this connection between East and West, or, a different European kind of thinking with the American reality, is something that could be a recipe for how to be more educated, a little bit wiser, and I try to do the same every day by seizing the day.
Carpe diem,
Carpe
which
diem.
which is Latin, not Greek, right?
It is. The Greek would be efzin, well living.
Awesome. Well, Kosti, Dr. Psimopoulos, it has been truly a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspectives, the learnings, the approaches that you use in that study of human flourishing, something that hopefully will grow in importance and spread and impact. With your permission, I'll be inviting you to come back in a little while to share more, because I think there's a lot that we haven't even unpacked yet. I have but one thing left to say, and that is the tagline: "You are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation." And stay tuned for one last thing, which is the sneak peek of next week's show. Thank you, Dr. Psimopoulos, and everybody else. We'll see you same time, same place, 8 p.m. on Created in the Image of God, 8 p.m. Central. Until then.
Thank you. Thank you, Wade.
Hey, everyone. Wade Franson here with a sneak peek of our upcoming show airing on April 21st with Robert Atkinson. Robert Atkinson is a celebrated and decorated individual who focuses on unity and oneness in the religious sphere. Welcome to the studio, Robert.
Thank you, Wade. Great to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and we're excited about this because we've been talking about things that are happening, including the rollout of something called Facets of One from the Royal Falcon Foundation, and your upcoming book, or book that's already been published, which is The Way of Unity: Essential Principles and Preconditions for Peace. Is that book already published? And tell us about it.
It was published in the end of last year. And it's a book that offers a new vision of the convergence of religion, spirituality, social action, community building, and peace building, all tied together. And these all come together in a way of knowing, being, and doing that represent an inclusive, holistic way of understanding the deeper nature of religion and spirituality.
I love the way you condensed that. And I know that on this show, we'll have a whole hour to unpack it. And it probably will take that hour because you condensed a lot into that short description. But I want to ask you a different question. Given what's going on the world scene today, people are aware of it, the Middle East. Did you know that this was coming? Is this why you wrote the book? And would it have made a difference if more people had read it?
Well, we've kind of seen signs of what we're in the midst of right now for a long time, unfolding gradually. And actually, it goes back to my 2017 book, The Story of Our Time, which is a little different version of this. But this one really focuses more on the original meaning of religion, which, in its original sense, religio means to bind together. So this is exactly what a divided humanity needs most right now. And a religion and spirituality for our time would involve a dynamic process that brings about and maintains unity on all levels: personal, interpersonal, and global.
Well, Bob, you're the author or co-author of like a dozen books, and the one you just referenced won the Nautilus Award. You've got a lot of accomplishments, and I'm excited to spend an hour with you. And for the audience, you're going to want to be there on April 21st, 8 p.m. Central Time on the Created in the Image of God with Robert Atkinson. We'll see you there.